The COP28 climate summit is getting underway in Dubai, with countries trying to agree on ways to keep the planet from overheating. But climate activists have doubts about how far the oil-rich host country will go to help end a climate crisis driven largely by the use of fossil fuels.
We don't want to shy away from that truth and that reality. We think that this is the right COP and the COP to be calling for a phase out of fossil fuels and centering a conversation on what a just transition away from fossil fuels look like.
The conference is taking place against the backdrop of the release of the first ever assessment of just how far countries have come in terms of fulfilling their commitments under the Paris Agreement. CTV's Scott Hurst has more for us now from the National Newsroom. So, Scott, what can we expect from this year's summit?
Well, good morning, Marcia, and we begin with a major first-day breakthrough at the UN Climate Conference in Dubai. A big step toward compensating countries struggling to cope with the rising cost of damage caused by climate change. And the delegates have approved a fund that'll help compensate mostly developing countries bearing the brunt of the climate-driven crisis. However, many details of the so-called loss and damage fund are still to be worked out, and many believe that the fund still may not be enough annually to cover the costs that are mostly borne by developing countries. Here's more from the president of the International Fund for Agricultural Development on the expectations for COP28.
It cannot just end on declarations. It cannot end just on goodwill. It needs to come with actual action. And I'm really hopeful that this COP will be focused on adaptation and also on how we can make a sustainable trajectory to disincentivize also fossil fuels.
So climate financing already brought up at the conference on day one. That was one of the key topics, as well as the debate over the transition away from fossil fuels. And the big question is how quickly, whether there'll be terms that are called a phasing out or a phasing down when it comes to these big international conferences and the final message that comes out. Messaging matters, the words matters greatly. Also, as you mentioned leading into this, Marcia, there's a lot of questions about where this is being held and who's in charge. Dubai, the UAE, is an oil-rich nation, and there's many questions about how seriously it is taking the climate crisis. And the head of COP28, the head of the conference overall, is the CEO of the UAE's national oil company. So there are some things that have already been worked out, many things still to be worked out at this two-week conference, and also many questions and concerns as we kick off this two-week conference, Marcia.
2 weeks, wow. Okay, I want to talk to you about Canada's position there, but before we get to that, just quickly, Scott, this is a massive summit. Who all is attending?
Yeah, it's a massive summit where there's 70,000 delegates from around the world, and some world leaders will be there. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau will not be in attendance this year, but U.S. Vice President Kamala Harris will be there. UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak will be there, as well as King Charles and the UN Secretary General will all be in attendance. So a lot of big names involved, world leaders and climate activists also there, and also people that are part of the oil lobby, as we said, that's happening in UAE. So lots of delegates, lots of factions, all giving their input to this UN climate conference. So a massive conference that will take place over the next 2 weeks with 70,000 plus delegates.
Scott, what are Canada's priorities and challenges at these negotiations?
So the Canada delegation will be led by Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. As I mentioned, Prime Minister Trudeau will not be there, and Canada will continue to work with its partners to accelerate global efforts to limit warming so that we don't continue to deal with the catastrophic impacts of climate change, and will also push to expand renewable energy projects. However, two of the biggest thorns in Ottawa's side recently when it comes to carbon pricing and energy initiatives will also be in attendance. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith will be there, as well as Saskatchewan Premier Scott Moe. They will also be in attendance, as I said, along with Environment Minister Stephen Guilbeault. So it'll be interesting to see, with so much infighting back here at home, how that plays out on a world stage, Marcia.
Indeed. All right, Scott, thanks for all that.